Welcome to Wayward Writers. I'm senior literary agent and author Heather Cashman.
I'm author and writing coach Stephanie Bearce.
And I'm author and writing coach Nicki Jacobsmeyer.
Our mission is to nurture and enrich established writers throughout their publishing journeys.
We welcome all genres, age groups, and publishing paths through video podcasts, online webinars, in-person retreats, and more.
We're here to help you conquer your path.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wayward Writers. We are excited today to have Victoria Strauss with us, who is the co-founder of Writer Beware. Thank you for joining us, Victoria.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Nicki, oh yes, of course. Yeah, we're super
thrilled.
excited. Yeah. Nicki, can you tell us more about Victoria?
Yes, I'd love to. So Victoria is the co-founder of Writers Beware. She's also the author of 9 novels for adults and young adults, including her Way of Arata epic fantasy duology and a pair of historical novels for teens, Passion Blue, which is a Kirkus Reviews best book for teens, and Color Song. She has written hundreds of book reviews for publications such as SF Site, and her articles on writing have appeared in Writer's Digest and elsewhere. In 2006, she served as a judge for the World Fantasy Awards, and she has received many service awards for her work with Writers Beware. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
So my burning question is, what inspired you to start Writers Beware?
I'm going to date myself, but back before the turn of the century, which is pretty amazing that I can even say that, when I first started getting serious about joining the online writers groups and interacting with writer communities, I started seeing all these awful stories about writers being ripped off by scam literary agents and vanity publishers. And I had a relatively good experience. I was never scammed, but I easily could have been because I didn't know a lot about publishing when I first started querying. But I had no idea that this kind of crazy world of scams existed in the shadows of the publishing industry. So I got interested and I began to follow the stories. And around the same time, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, which sponsors Writer Beware, was looking for someone to create a page of scam warnings. So I volunteered. And later on, I was introduced to Ann Crispin, who was also an SFWA member and was working on establishing a writing scams committee to look at the issues and issue warnings. So we decided to join forces because we were basically doing the same thing without knowing of each other's efforts. And that's how Writer Beware came to be.
We sure appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes,
I've
we
gone
do.
to that site many times and had clients say, hey, have you heard of this? Or my friend is. Anyway, I've used it multiple times. So we really appreciate it. Can you tell us what categories of publishing scams, what type of publishing scams and bad practices that Writer Beware reports on?
Pretty much any kind of bad practice in and around publishing. So that could include publishing and marketing scams, vanity publishers, agents who misrepresent their services or charge fees, honest contests,
Right.
weird things like strange awards that charge high fees. And we don't just report on scams. We look at issues of general interest to writers, such as copyright issues. We write a lot of posts on contract clauses that writers need to be aware of. we often cover publishers that are in trouble or have complaints against them. So it's a big variety of stuff. So I would say anything and anything that smells bad in the publishing industry. A lot of stuff.
It's beware and aware.
And we're grateful that you do cover it because I,
Yeah.
like Heather, have gone to your site many times to check out different aspects of the publishing industry. So, one of the good things that writers can do is use your site. What are some of the common mistakes that you see writers doing?
In general, when they're to start looking to or thinking about getting published, which is to jump in and try to learn on the fly. And that's very easy to do with the internet because you can do a few Google searches and find a lot of resources on how to get published or what to watch out for. But without some deeper knowledge of how the publishing industry works, it's very difficult to filter that information and figure out what's good and what's bad because the internet is a great resource. But there's a ton of bad information and misinformation out there, which I'm sure is not news to anybody. Before you start thinking about getting published, take some time to learn about the publishing industry. I would suggest finding a recent book, how to get published book. There are a lot of them. I know that's very old school, but it's a way to dip your toe in and learn at least the basics so that then when you go online, you'll be better able to figure out the resources that you find there. So to me, that's the biggest mistake is starting out without adequate knowledge of what you're planning to do, because there are a lot of decisions to make, not just avoiding scams, but whether you want to get an agent and approach the big publishers, or if you'd rather have a smaller house, or if you want to self-publish. Those are all very different paths, and you need to know something about all of them in order to make an informed choice.
So, if an author's questioning a possible scam, what steps do you think, Victoria, that they should take to verify or protect themselves?
I think knowing some of the warning signs, upfront fees where they shouldn't be charged. For instance, reputable agents and publishers don't charge fees or require purchases, such as book purchases, in order to offer representation or publication. Solicitation these days is a warning sign because there are a lot of scams out there that acquire clients by just emailing and phone calling out of the blue. If you're looking for an agent, you want to be sure that the agent has a verifiable track record of selling books to reputable publishers. If you're looking at a publisher, you want to make sure that the publisher has actually published books and try and assess their quality. And you can always check Writer Beware and do a search. We have a search box on our blog. You can see if we've written about the organization that you're interested in, or you can contact us directly to ask a question. And if we've gotten complaints, we'll tell you.
Also, if it's a new agent, like, you can just make sure they belong to an agency that is reputable as well.
Yes,
Um,
and if they're starting out on their own or establishing their own agency, look for relevant work background, worked with a publisher, or they've trained at another agency. You really want somebody who has the skills to do the job because
right.
being a literary agent, being a publisher, neither of those are entry level jobs. You really
That's for
want
sure.
to look for relevant. And it's also, if you're looking at a brand, I often hear from writers who say, there's this brand new publisher, it looks really great. Should I query them? And I always say if the founders have a lot of experience and can show that they have good funding, then maybe, but otherwise you should wait until they've actually been issuing books and have proven that they can do the job, because there's a really high failure rate. I often hear from writers who signed up with a brand new publisher and it goes out of business abruptly, sometimes without ever publishing any books. So that's an area where you want to be careful also with brand new companies.
Victoria, how do you get all the information for your scams? Do you go searching for them, or do people let you know, or is it a mixture of both?
It's a mixture. Mostly I find out from people who contact me. We have an email address. It's beware@sfwa.org. And I get emails from people who are asking questions about companies or who've been solicited by somebody. They want to know if they're reputable, or people who want to notify me about something bad or questionable. So that's mostly how I get the information. Social media is a good place to find out about things. And then I always do additional research. So it's a mix.
That's great.
There are so many scams out there, and thank you for reporting them and helping us with them. And a lot of times it seems because we're also desperate to be published. And I think a lot of the scammers prey on that desire to be published. So, how do you help writers to stay hopeful and positive?
When I do these interviews, they're all about scams, and we spend much of the time talking about how many scams there are and how awful they are. And I know that that's overwhelming. That can seem really overwhelming. Like there's nothing else out there. It's impossible to find legitimate opportunities. But that's really not true. I think you have to be realistic about the fact that they're out there and do what you can to educate yourself about the signs and indicators and the resources that can help. But to navigate with the knowledge that the reputable opportunities exist, and the more you know about how things should not work, the easier it will be to identify that kind of thing when you encounter it. And most scammers do prey on writers' hopes and dreams. They can be very skilled with the psychological manipulation. You have to try as much as you can to grow a thick skin and to be aware of that your desire for success can pose and the kind of blind spot that it can create. And I think just remaining aware of those dangers goes a long way in helping you to step back and evaluate things a bit more dispassionately.
I think that's getting harder and harder as time goes by, because I know Stephanie and Nikki and I have talked multiple times about the rise of AI generated content. I see in my business more and more vanity presses that call themselves hybrid publishers and things like
Yeah.
that. And I'm not trying to discredit them. There's social media publishing experts. There's a lot of ethical gray areas. So, where do you, or where does Writer Beware draw the line between something that is predatory and something that is really just a bad business practice?
The line is very blurry. We are generally very careful about what we label as scammy or predatory. We make sure that we can actually document that with evidence of bad practice, emails, contracts, etc. Not just because that's responsible reporting, but because we don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
So we do call out predatory businesses also. And I would say a good number of the blog posts that I write are about groups that maybe you wouldn't label as a deliberate scam, as in you take the money and run. The whole purpose is to deceive in order to profit. But as you say, sometimes it's just a poorly run business or someone
Yeah.
who's inexperienced and stumbles into bad practice by accident. And I always try and make that distinction when I'm warning. However, that said, the predatory businesses are as important to warn about as the scams, because even though you can make the distinction for the writer who gets involved, there's not a lot of difference on the back end. You mentioned hybrid publishers. Maybe these are not scams, but for a writer who has high hopes and then has a really disappointing experience, there is much out of pocket and potential damage to their careers as it might be with a deliberate scam. So those warnings are important as well.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen quite a few hard stories about scams or predatory use. Is there one that stayed with you, one that you felt was especially
Um,
tragic or
there
infuriating?
recently in December there was a relatively high profile arrest of the CEO and VP of a Philippines based publishing scam called Page Turner Press and Media, based in the Philippines, but primarily did business in the US and other English speaking markets. And I had been getting complaints about this organization for several years. It would draw writers in with promises to publish and market their books, but really just as a way to get them on the hook so that they could then be targeted for all kinds of fraud. They had a fake movie company that they used to defraud writers to the tune of six-figure fees. Just a whole range of completely fictional and bogus services. And generally speaking, scams like this kind of fly under the radar of law enforcement, not just because they're based overseas, but because their diffuse nature. They do business in every state. The average amount of money taken from the average writer is not huge from a law enforcement perspective. But this outfit scamming writers to the tune of, $300, $400, $5,000. Many of them complained to the FBI, which launched an investigation. And as I said, they arrested the principals in December, and they're now in custody and awaiting trial. And estimated that this scam took over $44 million, and
Oh my
defrauded something
gosh.
like 800
Wow.
writers. So it really is one, and I knew it was big because I got so many complaints about it, but I had no idea it was as big as it was. So that's definitely one of the biggest scams that I've ever.
Wow.
It is,
That's a
and
big
it's
scam.
not clear what will
Yes.
happen. Hopefully they'll go to trial and have to pay reparations, but they could do a plea deal. There's no way to know for sure. But I've written about it on my blog and I'm actively
Yeah.
following it. So I will continue to report as information comes in.
Well,
Yes.
now we're going to be following to
Definitely.
find out what happens too.
I mean,
Wow.
I'm sure publishing scams have evolved since the early days of starting Writer Beware. What do you think might be on the next frontier? What can we be looking for? Is there a certain area of scams that seem to be increasing or you see that might increase soon?
When WriterWare first started, really the only route to publication was the traditional route. agent to big publisher, and most of the scams revolved around literary agents and vanity publishers and editing services. Now that there are so many self-publishing options, most of the scams that we see focus on self-publishers, including this incredibly huge number of publishing and marketing scams from the Philippines, Pakistan, and India. What I'm seeing more of right now are scams that focus on social media, advertising on Facebook. There are enormous numbers of publishing scams that advertise it on Facebook, and I get a lot of questions as a result. And the other one that I'm seeing a lot of is an impersonation scam where someone who appears to be a real writer reaches out to you on social media for a friendly conversation. Hi, your work looks interested. Let's chat. But the ultimate goal is to refer you to a marketing service, like a scammy marketing service. So now, in addition to everything else, you have to be really wary of out of the blue contacts on social media because they are very often these kinds of scams. I think AI is probably the coming area where scams will be focused. Where I'm seeing that mostly is in scammers' use of AI to do book publishing tasks or to create grammatical emails and proposals, because for the overseas scams, the people that staff them are fluent English speakers, but not necessarily fluent English writers. And English language errors used to be a marker for those kinds of scams, but now that we have chatbots, that's changed. And they all produce flawlessly grammatical business type correspondence. I'm also seeing, I'm sometimes asked to evaluate publishing contracts. I'm seeing an increasing number of AI related clauses in publishing contracts, either regarding AI training, that the publisher won't submit the author's work for AI training, or requiring the author to warrant that they have not used AI in the creation of the work. And of course, there's this kind of wave of fake books on Amazon, AI created books. So,
And not including the AI stuff, it sounds like obviously having resources like Writer Beware and also a community like Wayward Writers and many others where you can talk to people. Hey, who did you use for advertisement on Facebook? Or that's where you can network, not only for opportunities, but also ways to help yourselves, but not get caught in these multi-thousand-dollar scams. That sounds very frightening. Beware indeed.
yeah, I agree. Writers' communities are super helpful and great for sharing information and getting recommendations. Yeah, it's a good thing to look for a good one and join up. I probably have a much thicker skin than most people because I've been seeing this for so long, and it's in a way predictable to me because though the scams vary, the techniques that scammers use are very similar because they all seek to use the same levers of persuasion in entrapping authors. But
And what are some of those levers, do you
praise,
think?
a lot of the solicitations now that the scammers are sending out include lavish praise of the author's work. And especially if you've self published and you're not getting many sales, or you've been trying to get published and you've gotten a lot of rejections, that can be a really powerful thing, and
Yeah.
it can kind of blind you to warning signs you should have trusted. Sometimes even just you've been laboring in obscurity, and everybody is subject to this. Just getting recognized or called out or offered something is just
Mhm.
a really powerful psychological lever, and
Yeah.
scammers definitely use it. Another thing is that it's harder to say no to a bad offer once it's actually been given to you. So many scammers who charge fees and approach authors directly don't reveal the existence of the fees. They approach as if they
Yep.
were real literary agents or
Mhm.
traditional publishers, and they have this great offer and they think the author's work is terrific and they think they can really work well to be successful. And only after that do they reveal whatever bad thing that they do. And it's harder to say
Yeah.
no once you've engaged in this kind of back and forth and you've gotten positive reinforcement. And then, of course, there are the time tested tact of threat and intimidation, which many scammers don't hesitate to use if authors get nervous or suspicious. So there are all kinds of
Right.
things. You know, it really is, it's a head game as much as anything else.
And like you were saying, having contact with other authors and community where you can say, hey, I got this, what sounds like a great offer,
Yeah.
and bouncing it off with people is good.
I see that on Reddit. Reddit is very active writers communities, and you see questions. I got this offer, or I was
Mhm.
told this thing, and then people will chime in and say, no, it's a scam.
Mhm.
So yeah, I guess
It's that
that's another
whole
thing that writers need to,
Yeah.
you know, take into their worldview is that they shouldn't try to go it alone. Seek out a community.
yes. It's
We
that old
so
adage,
agree
if
with
it's too good
that.
to be true, it usually is, right?
We do.
Have you
So,
ever encountered a scam that you felt revealed some kind of problem within the traditional publishing system itself?
Yeah, I think back in the olden days before self-publishing, it just that the gates to traditional publishing were just so closed. It was just so hard to get through. And that was a huge opportunity for scammers to exploit that by offering fake opportunities or a shortcut, a magic shortcut for which they would charge money. I also think one of the issues, and it's much less true now than it used to be, is that the traditional publishing industry was really just not affected much by the prevalence of scams. It all occurred in this separate space underneath, and the only point of connection really was the writers themselves. There didn't have to be a huge amount of attention paid, but now that scammers are actually impersonating publishers and literary
Yes.
agents to rip writers off, there is much higher consciousness, I think, of the prevalence of scams. You see warnings now on agents' websites. Most of the bigger publishers have fraud pages.
Yep.
Um, Groups like the Authors Guild have really started paying attention to the existence of writing scams. So there's more of I think, of an awareness within the publishing industry, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Victoria, you've spent so much of your career protecting writers. In your view, what makes a good literary agent or editor or publisher? And how can we as authors
Um,
recognize them?
a good literary agent should have a verifiable track record of sales to reputable publishers. So you really want to look for proof that the person can do the job. And the best proof of that is actual sales. You also want to do some web searching to see if there are any discussions or complaints. Sometimes these will show up online, or you can contact Writer Beware and I'll tell you if I've gotten any information. The agent's specialties and focuses vary widely, so make sure it's an agent who has sold books in your subject or genre. Someone who represents fiction exclusively is not going to be a good bet for your epic fantasy. Or if the agent has mostly sold to smaller independent publishers and your goal is a big publishing house, nothing wrong with the agent at all, but it's probably just not a good fit. Huge agencies with many agents, if you're a smaller writer, you may get lost in the crowd. So maybe you want to seek out a smaller, more boutique agency where there are fewer clients and the agents, there's a better agent client ratio. For new agents, I think we mentioned this, but you want the person to have relevant job background. A new agent setting up initially either at an agency, a reputable agency, or on their own may not have any sales, may not yet have qualified for membership in professional groups. But if they've trained at another agency, if they worked at as an editor for a bigger publishing house, or if they worked in publishing in a professional capacity, they have a better chance of success. But it is still, if you sign up with a brand new agent with no track record of sales, it still is a little bit of gamble
Yeah.
because not everyone becomes successful. And agenting is not for everyone, and it can take some time to discover that. And I've heard from authors whose new agent just suddenly left the business, leaving them high and dry. That's something to consider.
Sure.
That's really good advice. You've spent so much time helping and protecting people from scams. Are there what's been a happy, uplifting moment for you working with Writer Beware? What's made it worth all of this hard work and listening to heartache?
The page turner arrests, definitely. Law enforcement come for the bad guys, and there's accountability. That's definitely a good
That's a good
feeling.
one.
But really, anytime someone writes to me and says, I was on the verge of accepting this offer or signing up for this service, but I found your blog and I read your article and I didn't. I avoided being scammed. That makes it all worthwhile. That's really why I do what I do. I feel like I'm paying it forward and I feel like I'm making a difference and doing good work, and that really helps people.
Absolutely. We all appreciate it very much. I think that things that are long
Yes,
established
we
like
do.
this, I think often, people have a tendency to just accept it as like an established like part of the publishing community. And I think often we take advantage, or we don't mean to take advantage, but we often don't realize that there are people who are putting their lives behind these organizations, and so we really appreciate that. Is there a way that authors can donate to Writer Beware?
No,
Donation?
we to avoid any possible conflict of interest, we don't accept donations. And we do get questions, so I always refer people to our sponsor. SFWA has a couple of benevolent funds that
Okay.
people can donate to, so I refer
Mhm.
people there.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that information.
We're grateful to you and your team, what you guys do, Victoria, at Writer Beware, and we appreciate it and hope that you continue to find joy in everything in your writing while you're helping us protect ours. So thank you so much for your time and being with us.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you guys.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Wayward Writers.
Let's connect. Find us at waywardwriters.com, X, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
See you next time. Conquer your path.